We've got with us Pensacola Mayor D.C. Reeves on We Don't Color on the Dog. Mayor, gosh, news today at the special council meeting that Jared Moore is not going to run for another term. You talked about it at your press conference about what he's meant to you.
I look up to Jared in many ways. He's been in this government longer than I have. He's even before on council, he was involved in city government in other ways with boards and everything like that. And, it's a guy running a business with more kids than I could ever, have the sanity requirement of having. And so, I mean, it's pretty impressive to be able to handle all of those things. And as I said, I think he really sets a standard of saying, hey, I'm going to vote this way. I'm going to vote yes, or I'm going to vote no. Or how do we get to a yes together? How do we amend this? I mean, it's to me that perfect combination of somebody who's going to vote with their principles and vote what they believe is best for our community, but also try to figure out a way to do it in a collaborative way. And really, every time I've worked with him, whether it was individually in here or on the dais, we felt like a team, and I mean a team at the city. And there's been disagreement. There's been votes that I wish he hadn't voted, but that's part of it. And I think that really speaks to the lasting impact that he has. Is it isn't that because we agreed on 100% of things. It was the fact that even when we didn't, we were a team, and it felt that way. The administration and the council with Councilman Moore, we felt like a team, and that there were many things that by the time it got to council, because of good insight and advice, or things like that, and say, hey, maybe this isn't the best for the community, maybe this is, and I think that's how good government should be. And so we'll certainly miss him, and it'll be huge shoes to fill for whoever's in District 4. But certainly respect the his reasons behind that, and as I mentioned, all the stuff that he has going on in his life certainly makes sense.
Well, I think the one thing, and his fellow council members talked about it at the special meeting, was just his steady hand in presiding over a meeting, because that's an art. I mean,
Yeah.
particularly in these times where everyone comes a little bit with a chip on their shoulder with to a council meeting on a variety of issues, which they have a right to address their leaders, but it takes a steady hand to keep the room from not getting out of hand.
That's a great point, and that's kind of the nuance of that position. Being one of those council members that I think gets overlooked is how a meeting goes, how a community or public speakers feel heard, and how the meeting stays in control and stays on task. It is a very delicate balance. You can have some people lead a meeting and it's a meeting that would never end, or that gets where things start to get out of control, or you've got to have enough poise and enough self-control that I think it's safe to say, I'll at least speak for me, I won't speak for Jared, to say there's lots of things that you hear from the dais that absolutely aren't true, or like you said, this, especially this day and age, where where without a little bit of self-control and a little bit of poise and grace, that you yourself could allow a meeting to get out of hand. And so that is a very delicate art, and it was something that Jared did very well, not surprisingly.
We're coming up. The Baptist demolition will start next month. I know you've started meeting in the community more to try to get a handle on what the expectations are in that neighborhood. I think you had a recent meeting with the Black Ministers Association. Talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. We're trying to get out really in front and make sure that we have as much information out there as we can, especially in this time that you just described. Nothing really happening yet. The demolition's an 18-month process. So it might squeeze now with holidays kind of to the 1st of January, early January, where it would start. But, there's lots of work ahead of that. And so what I've said from the beginning of this project is it is our goal and our intent to make sure that the community is being engaged before major demolition is happening. And even though we know that what will go in that hospital's place long term is not only a long way off, but certainly hasn't been decided yet, and will be helped through these community meetings, that we didn't want the symbolism that something was taking place without that starting. So, we're trying to engage as many folks as we can. The December agenda will have the redevelopment expert, coming to council for their approval. So we would then have that team on board, kind of like we did with Hollis T. Williams, pretty much very similar, where we had those 30 plus meetings. And again, I think we kind of set a standard for what community engagement should look like on a project of this consequence. And I fully expect us to follow a very similar playbook to that. Different project, but in terms of not just having meetings, but meeting people where they are, and making sure that we're engaging different parts of the community, not just pastors, but also the people who live within 500 feet of this project and people around the region. We had a meeting actually with the military community about just housing in general. So we have try to have a clearer understanding of what's the need on base for it. And for example, it's not necessarily 17, 18-year-old kids. It's probably the instructors that are in that kind of pay scale that need housing affordability that are going to be here for 3 years. And so there's lots of folks to meet with, and certainly, we want to start that process. We'll really ramp that up once we have our redevelopment advisor on board, which we hope to have again next month. But we're not waiting on that. We want to make sure that we get as much information out there as possible and as much advice as possible. We got good advice in that meeting today, talking about, focusing on qualitative measures, not just quantitative measures, and being intentional about that. And so we've already got a nice little punch list for our advisor, even just from one meeting. And that's happening really with every meeting that we're trying to schedule now.
The fencing will go up on South Palafox in about 5 weeks. Between after Thanksgiving and January 5th, what can the public expect to see happening? What's behind the scenes?
Yeah. So what I tell you, our primary focus on South Palafox now is getting our collateral and our information funnel up and going. So whether that's a logo and a website for the project, as simple as and basic as that, as well as what those channels are going to be, how we're going to, what our structure of how we're going to communicate the project on social media, how we are intertwining the city's efforts on project management updates with DIB and working with those businesses all the way to, which Monday or which Wednesday I'm having coffee or lunch. I'm gonna have to do some more exercise because I'll probably be eating donuts and lunches downtown. And actually, we want to start standardizing me having meetings there, access to if I have questions about this project or others, and try to support those businesses. So we're really hyper focused on that. Adrian's doing an awesome job right now. I know our contractor, now that the part is complete, of course, they're procuring materials and all that stuff. So we got a lot of work ahead of us. Even the little things, Rick, like the banners that are right there at the Palafox Market that the city puts up every year. We've already held off all of those. We could have information, QR codes, whatever those banners are going to be during that construction. We've already reserved those. Now we had them reserved for a while, just knowing that we would need to communicate more for folks. We're talking about rat cards going to beach hotels. So when someone comes to the beach and that might want to come downtown, we don't want them to hear that the road's closed, and so we're getting very, very deep and intentional about, how we can best communicate on this project, the schedule of this project, and how that can work with all of the other assets of marketing and PR and advertising that are out there.
We'll definitely partner with the city on it. We're very much a believer in the project and the importance of downtown. I would imagine over the next 5 weeks, it's going to be trying to lay out. You don't want to make major changes to the sidewalk seating and things like that until you absolutely have to. But
Right.
somewhere after Christmas, you're going to have a plan on what tables get to stay and how you're going to, how people are going to navigate. And then I guess the other piece is what's the parking going to be? What's that policy going to be?
Yep. And it looks like we're leaning towards now that we would be doing all free. And, it's kind of interesting. 24-hour free is certainly what the business owners, when we had sent them the survey, and I said I would do what they want. Now, I'm a little torn about this, and maybe the glass half full is I think this might end up proving our point about why we started parking to begin with, which is when you have 24-hour free parking, it sounds good in theory to all of us, right? No one wants to pay $1 or pay 50 cents for parking. And I thought it was ironic. I've been seeing old photos going around on social media of downtown, of like Garden Street in the 1950s that all had pay stations, and Palafox in the 70s that all had pay stations. So it's not new, but part of the issue of 24-hour free parking is if you're an employee or you're a resident of Southtown or whatever the case may be, and it's 24 hours, you could be spending a lot of time in those spaces. And actually, it's really interesting. We've just got this data. Even when we made the changes to parking, even going from 50 cents to $1, what we said was we would increase churn. We actually have measurable data for that. We see that parking transaction times are down about 35% over even when it was 50 cents an hour. And that's a good thing for downtown businesses in a way, is to say, hey, instead of sitting there for a really long time, you might be there a little shorter. So now that parking space becomes available. So, I pledged to the businesses I would do what they preferred, and I still will stick to that. So as of now, that looks like it's going to be 414 spaces. And you know what? There's a good part of that. That visitors and residents know that they can come down and there's that amount of volume of free spaces, and that encourages them to come down. Great. We want to see that, and we want to continue to support the businesses throughout.
Well, and I'm sure it'll be monitored, and if a change warrants itself, the business can weigh in on that.
Absolutely.
I think that would be a part of it. I'm looking at I think it's going to be, I think everybody's fingers are crossed. I think is the best efforts being put into it. And I think as you can roll out more and more information, and we can do it with the podcast, and we can do it with the blog, and definitely at the press conferences, I think the more we smooth out the anxiety of change, I think the better off we're going to be.
Absolutely. And I think like you said, it's leaning on getting the word out, through the media, not just in, earned coverage, but being proactive, having maps saying, hey, visitor, I'm from Pensacola Beach, make it real easy for you to find where that free parking is.
Right.
So we really are trying to look around every corner that we've got, to say, hey, we've got to, defend the business vibrancy of this street and listen, if this was easy, it probably wouldn't have been 26 years since someone wanted to do it. And so, if that makes me seem a little less intelligent, that I'm willing to run myself into complex issues, it is what I said I would do, which is I'm just trying to do, and I absolutely believe we are doing what's best for our community long term, this investment. And that doesn't mean that it's lost on me that of the potential impact it can have. And that's what makes it hard. And so we are absolutely giving our 110% best effort to help businesses down there, to help our residents and our visitors know that it's open, that we're open for business, and to get this thing done as quickly as possible and have the beautiful street we can all be proud of.
Well, great. Mayor, have a great Thanksgiving. Thank you for doing this today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for watching, and to keep up with what's going on, be sure and subscribe. Just click on the little dog to the right and click the subscribe button. You can also like this video and click on the bell, which will notify you of new content. This really helps the channel grow. We appreciate you.